TFM.
Fun will now commence.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Journey, our dedicated Star Trek Voyager podcast. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me, as he always is my esteemed co-host, Matthew Rushing. And Matthew, why are you wrapped in a cocoon today?
I mean, it's just so comfortable, Chris. I think soon everybody's going to be wrapped in cocoons. It's much like a mask.
Yeah.
They're just incredibly comfortable. And as we learned from The Princess Bride, everybody should be wearing them. And so, and I do mean a mask around the eyes, not around your mouth. No confusion there.
I was going to say there's going to be like places with no cocoon signs up now.
Exactly.
We don't want those in here.
No, the cocoon thing, I just think people are going to realize that the sleep is great in it. It's just so
it
comfortable.
Does look comfortable. Yeah,
you know, and so absolutely everybody should check these out.
Yeah. All right. Well, business opportunity for us. TFM branded cocoons headed your way. All right, everyone. We are going to continue our 30th anniversary rewatch of Voyager today with episode 8 of season 1, Emanations. And here's a quick rundown of the story. Having failed to learn their lesson about roaming around in strange caves, a landing party from Voyager investigates an asteroid when they think they've discovered an unknown element. Instead of minerals, they find bodies, 18 of them, and lose one of their own, Harry Kim. The eager ensign finds himself trapped in a coffin on an alien planet. What's worse is that the planet is nowhere near the asteroid. In fact, it's in another dimension. How will he get back? And what secrets of life, the universe, and everything will Janeway and her crew reveal to the poor alien woman who woke up on Voyager? And Matthew, as exciting and interesting as these rings and the cocoons and everything going on here is, I have to ask you once again, why are we making a pit stop here?
Well, you see, Janeway had to go to the bathroom and couldn't hold it for the next rest stop. And so therefore the rings were the perfect place to be able to relieve. No, I don't know. This is definitely something that as I was watching the episode, I was thinking that as with Time and Again, you know, I know you like that episode. I didn't love that episode, but a question that we talked about at length, honestly, was why were they there? Because there really wasn't a reason for them to be there. And, you know, for this episode, it's interesting because the only reason that they're there is because they think they might have discovered a new element on the Starfleet elements chart, which, as exciting as that is, okay, I mean, I guess I know that Janeway said, you know, we're going to continue our mission as Starfleet officers as we try to get home and explore and all that. But it's like, I think that to really come down to it, the hardest part about Voyager is that instead of going out, and, you know, this is a little bit something that people thought Deep Space Nine struggled with, right? Because we don't go anywhere. But Star Trek has always been about going out and exploring from a point of origin. And Voyager was the exact opposite of that, which was, hey, we're very far from home. The only thing we have is to get home. And so the question then becomes, I think, with every stop that they make, where it doesn't have to do with them kind of getting home. Even our frustrations, you know, with ex post facto, at least for me, where it's like, why are we here? You know, they at least made the mention of, oh, well, these people have, you know, engine technology, which may help us to be able to, you know, have better engine performance so we can get home. And that makes sense for a pit stop. Whereas this just feels like we're once again kind of putting ourselves in a place where we don't necessarily need to be because it doesn't have anything to do with our mission to get home. And as cool as the possibility of a new element is, I mean, who knows what could kind of happen in an area of space you don't know about. So I don't know. It does seem a little bit strange to me. Did you have that same thought while watching the episode?
Well, you say, who knows what might happen in an area of space you don't know about? And when I'm watching this, at the beginning, my thought is, don't you guys remember what happened in Phage? And maybe you shouldn't go wandering around alien cave areas. Doesn't that make you a little uncomfortable? It seemed a little familiar to me. But
it's a great point.
I mean, the honest answer is that, especially the first time that I was watching this back when it originally aired, no, I wasn't really thinking about why are they here, because I always view Star Trek as, first and foremost, Star Trek, each individual episode is there to explore an issue and to tell a story and to provide social commentary. And that's the most important thing about it for me. And so I was okay with it. But when you raise the question, and when you look at the premise of the show, then of course, yeah, you do have to ask, why do you keep stopping everywhere when you need to get home? You should only stop if the place where you're stopping has a resource or a technology that could speed up your trip. Otherwise, don't stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it makes some sense in this context because, first of all, Voyager is a science vessel, and also Janeway is a scientist. And given her personality as well, I can completely understand why she's curious about this, and the crew overall is curious about this. And I think that we've discussed this on some podcasts before. I don't remember what episode we were talking about, but to be in Starfleet, you naturally must have this desire to explore space, and you're curious about the universe, and you want to explore and seek out strange new worlds, right? It's like, it's just at the core of who these people are. And so I think that even if a starship crew like this finds themselves trapped 70,000 light years from home, it's really, really difficult for them to fight that natural instinct to find out what this thing is. So because of that, even though, yeah, it fights against the premise of the show itself in terms of, well, we got to get back home, I think it feels very natural in Star Trek, and maybe that's actually one of the difficulties in making this entire setup of Voyager as a show work in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it, and I think it is something that they kind of continue to struggle with, and a big part of that, too, is that, you know, every week, for the most part, they're having to come up with something completely new alien-wise as well, which is a difficult thing to do. You know, one of the beauties of the Star Trek universe is kind of setting up all of these different alien races and cultures, which allow us to really explore, which is the thing, of course, that we ended up loving about Deep Space Nine, was the fact that it truly, instead of just hopping from one species to the next, we got the opportunity to really dive into those species, as well as the human condition as well in the 24th century, which made that so interesting. And so, you know, I think one of the things that would have then made this, at least the premise of this episode, interesting, right, is that the episode allows us to maybe, at least as they're setting it up, to maybe have a conversation about how one deals with death, which is at least as important as how one deals with life, don't you think? As a famous captain once said. And yet, the interesting part about this episode is that it barely touches on that idea for especially the main character who we focus on throughout the episode, which is Kim, and his displacement onto this other planet, having these in-depth philosophical discussions, which really seem to have zero impact on him as a person, which seems like a real detriment to the episode, because this whole episode would be so much better if we were dealing with Kim, dealing with the idea of death and what that might possibly mean for him, and maybe even creating in him a desire to maybe explore some religious ideas or philosophical ideas about death, because he talks about, oh yeah, we've had religions and theology all talk about that, and he just discounts it if it's an unimportant question. But how could the most basic thing about human beings is that we're born and we die, and what happens after we die is an incredibly important question for everyone to deal with. There's no ramification for this character whatsoever with that, which seems incredibly strange, especially since Voyager, up until this point, has kind of been utilizing its stories to tell us more about these different characters. And yet, for our main character of the episode, Kim, all we learn is that he's really eager to go out and explore, which is, okay, that's every Starfleet officer unless you're Hoshi in the 22nd century.
Yeah. He's very eager. So
not eager to learn anything. He's just eager to out there explore.
And then he probably learns from this. Maybe I shouldn't be quite so eager because I
exactly
I
get
myself
die.
killed, right? Yeah.
Well, and then I think that the other part about that, right, is that he's so nonchalant about the fact that to escape this planet, one, he takes it as that the only way he's ever going to be able to get off this planet is to do this, which is to die. And again, he's also so nonchalant about this idea of like, oh, they'll find me and they'll get me. It's going to be fine. Like, I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah.
Really? Like the opportunity?
Well, if you were young like that, a young Starfleet officer, you might still think anything's possible. Starfleet can do anything. Starfleet doctors can do anything. I'll be okay, right? Because he hasn't had the experience yet of actually seeing it not work, and he just knows the stories of exploration.
Well, and obviously he's right that they have the technology to be able to do this, right? But the question is, he doesn't know what's happening on Voyager. He has no idea where Voyager is at this moment.
Yeah, sure.
And so he's really just kind of like guessing. And I think in some ways it would just have been so much more interesting for the character to really struggle with this idea of like, what happens if they don't find me, and make it a really hard decision for him to do this instead of like just jumping in without thinking about it whatsoever. And I think that's a real detriment just to the episode and honestly, even just to the character at this point.
Yeah. Well, going back to the idea of Harry kind of dismissing the whole idea of the religion, the afterlife, and all this stuff, I think that stems from the most commonly presented view of people in the 24th century in Star Trek, which is that, at least on Earth, religion is something that's been cast aside. And even though we see that's not the case in some stories, that seems to be the overall view. And so I think it would be natural that he would view it that way as a Starfleet officer. And in terms of like this meaning something to him, this is where if we had more continuity within Voyager, if it were like a modern TV series or even like Deep Space Nine or Enterprise later on, it would have been an opportunity to bring Harry and Chakotay together, I think, because we see that cultural sensitivity early in the episode from Chakotay, who, it was nice that they gave us at least a little bit of a tie into his heritage as a descendant of Native Americans, where you can see that in their culture, they would have this idea of respect for the dead and how you interact with dead bodies and so forth. And that would have been an opportunity for, Harry could have come to Chakotay later and said, hey, I had this experience and I don't know what to make of it. I died. I came back to life. And I imagine Chakotay would have a lot of interesting and helpful things to share with Harry. And that could have been the beginning of a whole storyline between or a whole relationship that ran through the whole series that kind of brought them together. So that's an opportunity that was there. The other twist here, though, when you talk about Harry deciding that wrapping himself. And by the way, the family didn't notice the extreme difference in body build between
one is
Harry
extremely like buff and
know, right?
but no they thought that their dad had really gained about 35 pounds worth of muscle
and gotten shorter as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And had really, see, that's what the thing is, Chris. It's a little bit like The Office, where if you're gonna do a run, right, you need to carb load, and that's just what he had done before death, which is he carb loaded, right, and so
in the 45 minutes before,
exactly, really just ballooned up, and so yes, that I thought the exact same thing. I was like, this is slightly ridiculous that they can't tell that this is not the same person, because there's no way this is the same person. It doesn't even compute that this would be the same person.
Yeah. So, okay, but beyond that, anyway, the idea that Harry felt he had to wrap and be killed, and had the faith that he would be transported somewhere where Voyager could pick him up.
Are you saying he had faith of the heart? He
had faith of the heart. Yeah. He did. And faith of the wrap. So the one reason, he actually mentions it in the dialogue, the idea that, maybe these people, these aliens are from another dimension.
Right.
And that his reality is a different dimension from their reality. And when they die, they are transported. Like, if you think about, and I don't know, you can say much better how you view this than how I view it, but in our own beliefs on Earth, the idea that when you die, your spirit goes to another realm, it seems to me like that's a different dimension or something from where we're living right now on this world. So Harry's kind of alluding to that. Mm-hmm. And within the context of this story and Star Trek and the science of Star Trek, it does appear, although it's never explicitly stated, that these are interdimensional aliens and they exist in another dimension separate from us. And when they die, they're transported into our dimension and they appear. And so for Harry to get away from there, it does seem like the only way that he can get back to the dimension where Voyager exists and can possibly pick him up is to die, because when he dies, then he's transported. Mm-hmm. So it does seem like it is his only solution. So that part of the story was okay for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an interesting aspect of the episode of whether or not they actually are in another dimension, which, this is something that they actually never answer in the episode whatsoever. Mm-hmm. They just leave it to your imagination, I guess. And so, which is, it's fine. And yet I do think that, I think you said something that was great. And it was a thing that I had thought as well as we were kind of talking on the other side of the quadrant before we began recording, which was this episode was a perfect opportunity to create a relationship between Kim and Chakotay, where Kim decides he wants to explore spirituality and different spiritualities and see if there is anything that, he does want to believe in. And because of his experience, and of course they do not go that way, which is a little bit disappointing because I think it would have been incredibly interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's something that's missed, and I think that even, my wife and I have mentioned that we're rewatching The Next Generation, and
Mm-hmm.
Even on The Next Generation, I feel like because by the time season 3 rolls around and then you move into season 4, the writers were much more cognizant of working and writing character into the story. And so every episode was more about a character and what you could learn about that character through what they're going through in the episode. And so, which I thought was great. And what's fascinating is that a lot of the episodes here in the first season of Voyager seem to kind of be missing it almost seems like blatant places where actual character study could be done or connection of characters, and they're just kind of missing it, which is a little bit strange. Obviously it's the first season of the show, and most Star Trek first seasons tend to have to feel things out. And I can't say whether or not this is better or worse yet. But this is just another spot where they kind of miss something. But another big thing they miss, Chris, has nobody heard of the Prime Directive on this show?
Yeah, you mentioned that when we were chatting beforehand on the other side of the quadrant. And yeah, I mean, I suppose at this point, like they don't know anything about okay, so on our side of the interdimensional passageway, we just see bodies in cocoons, so they're just exploring and they don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. On the other side, Harry is in a culture which clearly does not have space travel, does not have knowledge of other life,
right,
and has beliefs about the afterlife that, at least from a Starfleet perspective, would lead you to believe that they believe that they are the only life in the universe, and that they don't have a firm understanding of
right.
their world yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess your point is that Harry shares a lot of information with them that he probably should have kept to himself.
Okay, so yes, I mean, you're definitely picking up the things that I think really kind of were creeping into my mind this whole episode. But I will say it's not just Harry that has this issue. There's literally no way that Janeway should be bringing somebody back from the dead who's dead from a planet she knows nothing about.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what happens, right? They actually have to deal with the ramifications of basically destroying the Prime Directive as if it means nothing. And I think that is the thing that, honestly, I would say made me actually kind of angry about this episode, because it's as if nobody in the writer's room thought this should even be a question for Janeway, right? That nobody even brings it up. They only bring up the idea of, is this right for us to do this, in the sense of, to bring somebody back from the dead who's, for all intents and purposes for them, is dead. But nobody brings up, do we have the right to do this under Starfleet and Federation law, because we don't know anything about this species, and therefore to bring them back from the dead, if we don't know if they're warp capable species or anything, we're totally screwing with. So on both sides, I mean, yeah, Kim is doing some real dumb stuff. But Janeway is being kind of just as dumb. And I was like really shocked about that fact, because it would have been much more interesting then. Again, the episode would be much more interesting if the struggle for like half the episode is Janeway having to wrestle with herself and with others of the crew about the implications for the Prime Directive and whether or not she's willing to break it to possibly bring Harry back. And so, yeah, that was... Brandon Braga really missed the boat on that one, which is surprising, because it's Brandon that writes this and it's David Livingston who's directing. And both of those people have extensive knowledge of Star Trek by this point. So I guess this is just one of those places where Janeway is like, screw it.
Yeah, I guess one question is, does the Prime Directive, either officially or in the minds of captains and other Starfleet officers, apply to individuals from an alien race, or only to the civilization itself? Because we see that they're a lot looser with it when they're dealing with one person than if they were actually making contact, like if they were going to expose themselves to an entire village, for example.
Which I think in that sense is correct. The only way that it's ameliorated for Janeway's side is this woman dies again, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that still then doesn't have anything to do with the damage that Kim is doing to the society.
Yeah. So the Kim side, this is a case where in Star Trek, I mentioned earlier that for me, the most important part of a Star Trek episode is the social commentary, that we're going to deal with an issue and we're going to really talk about it. We're going to wrap it, put it in... It's a lot of rapping going on in this episode. You could put it in science fiction wrappings. And this is a case where when you tell a story like this, where you are focusing on issues like cultural sensitivity, death and all his friends, you have all this dialogue going because you need it to actually explore the issue. And so if you have something like the Prime Directive, that really gets in the way of the storytelling, right? It's like, I'd like to explore this issue, viewers, but I can't because Starfleet Command won't let me. You can't say that in the episode. So I think that's where you have to be very loose. And if there's one rule in Star Trek that gets airlocked whenever it's convenient for storytelling, it is the Prime Directive. And
I agree with that part of it. I think the interesting aspect is that nobody even brings it up. Normally if we're going to disregard the Prime Directive, we bring it up, right? And then we just like, you know what? We're not going to pay attention to that this week, guys. Yeah. It's fine. Well, we're 70,000 light years from Earth. What are they going to do? Fire me? And right. So those are the aspects where I think yes, we do that all the time, and yet just nobody brings it up, which is really weird.
Well, on this crew, you would think that Tuvok would be a character, being a Vulcan, would stand up and say, Captain, Prime Directive. And the Doctor bringing the alien woman back to life. So he is the computer, right? So you would expect that if ethically the Prime Directive is so important to Starfleet, that it would be programmed into the computer and there would be some kind of safety mechanism. So the Doctor, 100%. Because he is the computer, would at least tell the captain, yes, I'd love to help. I'd love to bring her back to life, but the Prime Directive states that we cannot do this, right? Yeah. So, and I'm not saying that I necessarily want them to put that into the story, right? But I think if we're viewing this as a real world, we like to think of Star Trek as a real universe. That is something that probably would be part of the ship and therefore part of the Doctor.
Well, and I can even just hear it right now, right? I'm sorry, I can't do that, Captain. It's against my programming. And she'd say something, he's like, I'm a doctor, not a lawyer, and it's like, it's the whole argument there would have been incredibly interesting because, like you said, this should be kind of against the Doctor's programming in that sense, because the idea of the Prime Directive can't necessarily, I think, be overridden maybe. And here the Hippocratic Oath doesn't even exist for this character because they're already dead for their society, right? Obviously, or this person wouldn't be here. And so, it's a really interesting thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe the Doctor has a little bit of Jim Kirk in him. He is modeled on
or
many,
Bones,
many.
Bones is a little bit cavalier with the rules. So there you go.
Yeah. So, the other big thing that they're trying to address here is, as we said earlier, death and all his friends. How do you deal with death? How do we care for the elderly? How do we care for family members as they get older? How do we value them? And then at the time that this was written, assisted suicide was a very big topic in the news in the United States. Even though assisted suicide seems to be an element that Braga is trying to play up in the story, I'm not sure that it aligns well with the episode because
Agreed.
Garen doesn't actually want to die. He feels that he's a burden on his family.
Yes.
And as we see how these various family members behave in these ceremonies, you can tell that the society, the culture seems to be one in which, to avoid burdening people with elderly family members, they've created an entire story about the afterlife, and they've created... Now, I think there might be some tangible reason for them to believe in this afterlife, but they've created the story around it and created a ceremony around it to make it easy to push away people as they get older, so that the younger members of the society can continue to live their lives, which is probably seen as great until you reach that age where it's your time to go, and then you realize, hey, I'm not ready to go yet. So I don't think this really addresses the whole assisted suicide topic that was in the news at the time, but it very much addresses how cultures view their elders and what value is placed on people as they get older.
Yeah. That part I really agree with. I think you succinctly put the way in which this doesn't quite deal very well with the idea of euthanasia. And yet this really does seem to be talking about the way in which we care for our elders. What is their value in our world? And do older people still have value, right? If they're at a point where they need to be cared for more than they can add to the world, which, I always find to be an incredibly interesting discussion, because I think it's akin to the discussion we have about babies, right? Children and babies cannot do anything for themselves. They have to be completely cared for, sadly, we're at the point where kids apparently need to be cared for well into their 30s because they're returning home to live with their parents. But that's a whole other story, right? But here, just because somebody is not able to work, or it takes work for you to be able to, it takes effort on your part to care for them. I think that the really terrifying aspect of this is that there's such a utilitarianism to it, and I think this really shows the poor nature of the utilitarian argument, is that just because it benefits more people doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. And so I think all of that is not necessarily dealt with really well in this episode. And I think on top of that, I think the way in which religion is kind of used as, it doesn't necessarily even seem to be in a religion, right? They just have this belief about the afterlife. There's no thought process about a God here or anything like that. I mean, really, this isn't even religion. This is just for them it's like a science, right? We transfer into the next emanation. How they put that together.
Well, I think there's a spirituality to that way of thinking, but it's not a parallel necessarily to
exactly.
Earth
I think
religions.
that's the other part. And so I would say that one of the big issues that I also come down with this is that, and I hate to keep saying this, but I think the writing of this episode really skims over the most important aspects that you really need to be diving into to make them feel real, right? Like this is a real society, and there's so little answers to many of these things that as a viewer, you're kind of left scratching your head like I guess I get what you're going for there or whatever, but it's so ill-defined.
Yeah.
And so it's like a facade, right, on a movie set. The moment you go through the door, there's nothing there. It's just hollow. And I think much of this episode, as you start to talk about the different ideas that are being presented, It's not done in a way that truly make you have a discussion about the thing that you kind of understand the episode to be about. Whereas, to reference, Voyager later on, right? You're going to have a much more interesting episode, I guess, at least on the question of like euthanasia with Death Wish.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Where you truly are dealing with that topic. And so, yeah, I think it's just really interesting. And,
well, I think, so the premise here for this story, I think, is a very interesting one, but I think it's not possible in a 42-minute Star Trek episode, especially not a season 1 episode where you don't have a framework, and also in a series where you're just jumping from place to place every week. It's not possible to explore this concept properly. This would make a very good novel where you actually have the room to really dig into these issues and to build the world and really explore it. So I think Brannon Braga's concept is very interesting, but yeah, I don't think it's effectively explored here. No, it's not executed in the way that it needs to be to properly serve the material.
No, I think you really summed that up well. And I think that a lot of the kind of things that we've been discussing really kind of pinpoint that, right? Where it's just, these are the type of issues that you're running into. And I will challenge a little bit. I do think that you could have done this in 42 minutes or whatever Voyager episodes are at this point. But you would have to go through this episode and you would have to carefully craft every single moment of the episode to be working towards the thematic elements and the character elements to make it all work. And I think, as we know for season 1, everything for season 1 was rushed. And they were having a very hard time with the writing of the scripts, getting the scripts done and completed, especially, the first half of the season was extremely rushed. And so it almost feels like this should have been an episode where they said, you know what, we're going to put this in the second season so that we can actually work on the story and we can really refine it, and then but and that's where I think I have faith that they could have done this story if you had done that, because I feel like obviously with Deep Space Nine, especially in those later seasons, you get a lot of those writers who really at that point, they understand the characters, they understand the show, and they're able to do some incredible work, like say in The Pale Moonlight, where you are doing something in 45 minutes that has never been done on Star Trek before, and you are digging at the very depths of humanity, the character of Sisko, the Federation. I mean, that's fantastic. I think they could have done the same thing here with this if they had just had, more passes at the script. Yeah. Because like you said, the ideas here actually not bad ideas.
Yeah. Now, in The Pale Moonlight, relies on a very well-established world and framework.
True, exactly.
For it to work, right? So they're not starting from this situation where they've encountered a culture for the first time, where the viewer knows nothing about them. So they're at a great disadvantage here. So okay. So it's possible that you could do a lot more with this in the time that you have, but it would take a lot of work, and that's not something that they were in a position to do in season 1 of the show. So, yeah. Well, okay. So those sound like a lot of final thoughts from us. Do you have any other final thoughts, and what's your rating for this one?
Yeah. I think the most interesting aspect of this episode is the characterization of Chakotay. I really, really like what we're doing with Chakotay here, and I think it makes absolute sense, actually, for the way in which he reacts to this whole situation. And it's one of those places where I watch an episode like this, and then I kind of start to think about the rest of the series and all of the places where we really kind of miss ways in which Chakotay could be much more important to the different characters, right? And a much more important part of the story, I think. And they create this character who has his own sense of spirituality. And, Voyager, unfortunately, will revert back to the thought process almost on spirituality that the Next Generation has, which is very unfortunate because Deep Space Nine has a much more nuanced and a much better explanation and discussion of that. And Chakotay is created as a character to represent the Native American culture and just Native culture in general, because even though they would consider him Native American, it's Central American. Anyway, that's something that I lament in some ways, because I actually really like Robert Beltran, and I think he's actually a really a good actor on the show. They just, it's that place where I'm lamenting the fact that he doesn't get more to do.
Yeah, they don't utilize him well.
Yeah, especially when this is a perfect place to be able to do that. So, honestly, unfortunately, I think, Chris, for Emanations, I'm going to give this 2 out of 5 spiderweb cocoons. I think that this is just kind of an unfortunately poor episode, and it really lacks the polish that was needed to really make it shine. And so that's where I land. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the episode for me, it's one that when it first aired, I thought it was quite interesting. I think the concept of it is very interesting. That's what it all comes down to. It's only after I rewatch it and break it down and analyze it, and I start thinking, well, if they did this and this and this, it could be better. So,
right.
I think it's an episode of Star Trek Voyager. It's an episode of Star Trek. It's fine. It's an average episode. One thing we didn't mention that I did find nice about the characters is that we see this moment in Kess where we've got a very young, wide-eyed woman who is just learning about the wider world for herself, talking to this alien woman who has woken up in an unfamiliar world and is learning about things as well. And I thought that was a good use of Kess to talk to her, as opposed to having a different member of the crew be the person who's filling her in on stuff. So I thought that was a nice characterization. I'll also say that if you want to level up your enjoyment of this episode, take note that Neria, who is the thanatologist, the scientist who studies death on this world, is played by Jerry Hardin. Now, did you recognize which other character Jerry Hardin had recently played in Star Trek at this point?
It had to be somebody on Deep Space Nine, right?
It's on The Next Generation.
Okay. No, I missed it.
He's Mark Twain in Time Zero.
Oh my gosh, you're right. It's been so long since I've seen that episode, but yes.
And now it's not so recognizable in the face, but once you realize who he is, then listen to his voice and listen to all his dialogue in the ceremonies, the euthanasia, everything, sending Kim up and all. And you'll hear Mark Twain delivering all these lines. And so it puts a little twist on this episode.
Yes, that's great.
Kind of elevates the fun a little bit. Not that it's fun to be killed and shot into space in a cocoon.
So much fun, Chris!
All right. So I'm going to give this episode 6 thanatologists. All right, everyone. We would love to hear your thoughts on Emanations. There are many ways for you to share those with us. Perhaps the best way is to go to Facebook and join the Babel Conference. That is our listeners group. It's there to extend the conversations beyond the podcasts. So if you're joining for the first time, please do answer the questions and agree to the rules of the forum so that I can let you in. You'll find a post for this episode there on the timeline, and you can share your thoughts with Matthew and me and fellow listeners right there. Of course, you can also send us email. Go to our website, trek.fm/contact. Use the form you find there. Choose to send to a show and choose To the Journey, and that will come to us by email. And, of course, you can find us everywhere on social media. Our username is TrekFM. And if your podcast app of choice allows you to leave a rating and a review, we'd love to get that from you as well. Now, Matthew, when you're not destroying civilizations by violating the Prime Directive, where can people find you?
You know, Chris, it's just a lot of hard work, and nobody really seems to appreciate the hard work that I go through to destroy the Prime Directive. But if you want to hear all about it, find me on social media under the name MattRushing02. You can also find me here on the network outside all the great Star Trek talk that we're doing in the 602 Club, where we're talking about all of those great franchises we love. Honestly, this summer is going to be gangbusters for the 602 Club. We've got a lot of great stuff that's going to be coming out, so check that out. Over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got a couple of shows. One is completed about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, and that show is called Owl Post. And then you can also find me on Aggressive Negotiations as the great John Mills and I talk about Star Wars each and every week. But Chris, you know, when you're not trying to figure out why you're in this like weird spider-webbed cocoon of I don't know what that is, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on the network doing all the various shows with you. You can also find me in many shows in the back catalog. And then in social media, my username everywhere is CBryanJones. So I'd love to chat with you there about Star Trek or whatever else you're interested in talking about. And if you'd like to help us keep this rewatch and everything we're doing on the network going, we could definitely use your help. To find out how to support the network, please visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm. We would not be here without your help, so thank you to everyone who is supporting us right now. All right, Matthew, well, I hope you're hungry because next time we're going to enjoy some pecan pie as we jump through space and talk about prime factors.
Well, Chris, set course for home.